Okay, uh, this is the counseling class. This is chapter 2, Ways of Understanding and Perceiving Ourselves and Others, the self and others. Practitioners must realize that each person constructs reality in their own unique way. Just because somebody is white doesn't mean that they always have the same types of thoughts. Just because two people are maybe from the same tribe, such as the Dene people, doesn't mean that they will always create reality the same way. And we have to allow people to create reality the way that they see it. This is called constructivism. Constructivism focuses on how individuals describe their experiences in terms of personal constructs. A personal construct is an explanation of an event or series of events that becomes the lens through which the individual sees the world. These constructs are developed as individuals interpret and give meaning to their experiences. Constructs are not consciously developed. They are just the way that we put the world together in our own minds. These two ladies, I've never ridden on a camel. I actually have never ridden a horse. So my construct would be completely different from somebody who rode horses or somebody who rode camels, I've been to Egypt, but I have never ridden a camel. I was in the military at the time. So my construct is probably different. I spent 12 years in the service. I spent 30 years working in medicine. So my reality construct is probably a lot different than somebody else's. Somebody who has never been in the military, they would have a different concept of reality. And this is one of the reasons why democracy is so important. We all have our own different constructs. We have our own different concepts of reality. And of course, that is what guides us into choosing who we want to be our representatives, who we want to be our president. And of course, the election is coming up in November. Please, everyone vote. I don't care if you vote for one person or the other or nobody. You still need to consciously think about who you're going to vote for. Voting is extremely important. That's what makes us Americans. One of the problems is that a lot of minority people do not vote, and the reason they don't vote is because they don't feel like they have a voice in what happens. But the reality is, if you don't exercise your vote, then people will ignore you, and they don't have to do what you need them to do or what you want them to do. They will do whatever they want to do because they don't have to worry about you voting them out of office. So voting, whether you vote, no matter who you vote for, they need to know that you have a voice, and that's as minuscule as your voice seems. If they your voice is absent if you don't vote. So please, 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 in the fall, vote. You can sign up now to vote. In some states, you can sign up on the day of the election, actually. But please plan to vote in November. And like I said, it doesn't matter who you vote for. What does matter is that the politicians are aware that you are voting and that they need to pay attention to you. Social constructivists focus on how relationships, language, and context influence an individual's or a group's interpretation of self, others, and the world. And I don't know why I put a picture of French poilu. Poilu is the word that they use for soldiers in the French army, especially during World War I. This is a World War I picture. The muds of France. Poilu, interestingly, means the hairy ones. So the French army, they didn't shave, so they had beards and mustaches and whatnot. Personality is the individual's distinctive qualities, their traits, their characteristics, their behavior patterns. Personality is a socially constructed idea. It's society that tells you how to interpret your personality, or what about you is important, what makes up your personality. That's a social thing. Some of our strongest personality constructs are developed in childhood. These constructs tend to be harder to change because they are based on immature feelings and possibly illogical thoughts, and are established by the undeveloped mind as truths. And the reason I put a picture of a child who has been abused is because this child, he looks like he's about 5 or 6 years old. This individual, their concept of what the world is like, their reality, is going to be different because they were abused by the people that potentially were supposed to be protecting them. And of course, that will change the way that you see the world. Childhood carryover. Mother, my child is intelligent, handsome, and funny. And the child says, yes, that is true. And of course, they grow up with positive thoughts about themselves. But what if the father says he is too awkward to play sports? The son will say, that's true, I am bad at sports, and therefore they will never try. The mother says, no one will love you unless you are thin and beautiful. And the daughter says, that's true, I must lose weight and wear lots of makeup to cover up my many flaws. And as you can see, she probably put on a little bit too much makeup. That's, of course, the Joker from one of the Batman movies. That's Heath Ledger as the Batman. The parents, people not like us, can't be trusted. And the child, of course, they say that's true. People who are different are dangerous. Therefore, we need to reject them because they are just too dangerous. The parents, they say you are worthless and will never amount to anything. And of course, the child hears that and they say, you know, that must be true. Why even try? I think I'll just go and become homeless. I won't even give her a shot, give life a shot. Culture strongly influences words used to describe someone's personality. Minority cultures will sometimes accept the dominant culture's view of themselves as true and use that definition to evaluate themselves. And nothing makes me angrier than someone who lives up to their whatever their negative stereotype is. That just really irritates me. We all have the ability to create ourselves, to be whoever we want to be. And if we allow somebody else to define us, then that does not give us an opportunity to be successful in life. Because given the opportunity, people will drag you down if they can. And I've seen this in positive situations where you had a group of individuals that were trying to do something, a team. They were trying to solve a problem, and there were always people around who were telling them they couldn't do it. And of course, if you believe everything people tell you, then you will never get anything done. And of course, the picture on the right has to do with some of the negative things that the dominant culture calls American Indians. They drink like a fish. They are crawling drunk. And of course, if you accept the stereotypes, that is really unfortunate, and that is really sad. The constructivist perspective helps practitioners remember that their view of the world may be different from their client's view. The practitioner needs to remember to work within the client's view of reality. And of course, I have a picture of Jersey Shore reality television. Once again, you need to recognize who people think, how they see reality. That is the most important thing. When an individual, family, or group becomes aware of a construct that is unsatisfying or limiting, the individual can develop another meaning for events or experiences and begin to realize change is possible. But the idea is better if it comes from the client. Of course, sometimes a practitioner will have to work with pair bond structures that have very different individual constructs. Pair bonding has to do with relationships, husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. These are pair bonds. A husband may believe that a wife should stay home and raise the children, while the wife may feel that they should be able to go out and work. And this was the biggest argument when I first started in psychology back in the 70s. The argument was, should the mother stay home and raise the children, or should the mother go out and work? And it was pretty touch and go for a while. When I was in high school, when I was growing up, there were very few women that actually worked outside the home. Most of them were homemakers. And I can remember reading my sister's yearbook, and they always said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And all the girls would say, "I want to be a wife and a mother." And my sister said that she wanted to be President of the United States, and I always thought that was kind of cool. But then again, our mother was a nurse, and she worked outside the home. Of all the people at the high school where we went to high school, we were just about the only working. My mother was about the only working mother out there, and there were people that gave her a hard time about it as well. Systems theory takes into account the entire system with which an individual interacts. A system is seen as a complex entity within which interactions are as important as the individuals. Rules are established by the family to teach what is expected or permitted by individual family members. The rules help to regulate and stabilize how families function as a unit. And as you can see, the grandfather is talking to the girls, and the father is pouring the orange juice. I'm guessing the mother made the meal, whatever the meal is. There's milk for all the children. There's the grandmother. There's the grandmother in the purple shirt. And there we go. Okay, I always saw her as one of the kids, but she's not. Changing one part of the family system will result in changes to other parts, so you have to be careful what you do. You've got to watch to see how things have changed. You don't want to change one part and make something else worse. You don't want to make it worse for this select individual. You want to make it better for everybody involved. So if you're going to change any part of the system, you have to be very, very careful that you're not destroying, you're not damaging another part of the family system. If something in the family dynamic changes, like a wife getting a job to help with the family finances, the homework distribution will have to change to even out labor. And of course, if this takes something away from the father because he has to work more at home, and now suddenly his job is in jeopardy, have you really helped anything by changing what has happened in the family? Maybe now the daughter has to do the cooking and a lot of the house cleaning, as well as the father who works 12 or 14 hours a day. Now all of a sudden the daughter has to cook the meals, and if that's the case, then all of a sudden her schooling may be damaged. You've got to be very, very careful as to what you suggest. The other problem that you can have with when you do change something in a family dynamic, in the family dynamics, is that sometimes people will don't like it, so they will become passive aggressive. And if they become passive aggressive, of course, there is no possibility of success. Family systems may be open or closed in various degrees. In a closed family system, the family exists in relative isolation, with communication taking place primarily between members. And if you've ever been around, well, you guys have probably never been around Anabaptists, the Hutterites, the Amish, the Mennonites. These individuals live in closed family systems. There's not a whole lot of other communication that's taking place. Some of the more fundamentalist religions are this way. They don't want people interacting with people that aren't from that religion. Um, and the reason they don't want them to interact is because they don't want them to be tainted by somebody from another religion. Change is avoided in the closed family system. Members hold on to established traditions and values. The most important thing to them is the fact that this is the way their family did things. My wife, her family, her mother had a lot of problems. She had some mental problems, and she was relatively negative about the children in her family, and it was really tough. The father was okay, but the mother had problems. And at one point, the son asked the father, "Well, why don't you just divorce her? She keeps doing all these crazy things." And he said, "We don't do that in our family." So when the son became older and he got married himself, and he had a wife that was really doing negative things, uh, people came to him and they said, "Well, why don't you just divorce her? She's crazy." And he said, "We don't do that in our family." So there you go. He thought that it was a tradition to stay married to somebody. And as a matter of fact, the another member of the family, another sister, was married to somebody who was psychologically abusive to her, and she stayed with him for decades. Finally, leaving after all the children were out of the home, because that's not what they did in her family. But he was fairly destructive, psychologically abusive to her. Characteristics of an open family system: willingness to assimilate new information and to engage in ongoing interactions with their environment. The family has no single correct way of doing things. As the family matures, changes are tolerated, they're supported, and of course they are celebrated. And this is a Bollywood dance number at the end of a movie, but things change, and of course, as things change, the open family will change. The closed family will never change. They don't want to change. They think everything is perfect. In family systems perspective, practitioners gain an understanding of how interactions within the family system affects their clients. Family systems assist clients in identifying reciprocal relationships between their behavior and influences of the systems within which they interact. Clients realize both how someone else's behavior is influencing them and how their behavior is influencing others. The ecological perspective views people and their environment as continuously evolving. The ecological perspective is less concerned with cause and effect and more concerned with the transactions that occur between people and their environments. The ecological perspective was derived from the concept of biological ecology. This structure enables practitioners and clients to think about the reciprocal relationship between people and their environment. A good example would be if you were in the military and you moved to Japan. How would you interact with with your environment? That is a different environment. Or using an example that you may have lived through, what if you were born and raised on the reservation and you decided to move to Phoenix, or decided to move to Flagstaff or Albuquerque or Holbrook or Snowflake or whatever, Sholo. You decided to move someplace else. How you interacted with your environment, this new environment that you're in. On the reservation, it's relatively rural situation. You have everybody around you is like you. If you move to Phoenix, of course, the probability of everybody being around you being Navajo would be fairly remote. So how in the world would you suddenly start interacting with with that environment? Another example would be from my own life. Of course, I was up here in Iowa in 2016. I started teaching at Dene College. I moved down there for the school year, and it was a totally different situation for me. Here, of course, I'm around other farmers, just kind of like the way I grew up. It was kind of interesting. I'm white. Most of them were white. What else? I could get medical care anytime I needed it. Uh, it's just down the road about 15 minutes. If I When I was living in Saline, my closest medical care that I could utilize was about 70 minutes away in Gallup. That was a little unnerving. Groceries were 70 minutes away in Gallup or 35 minutes away in Chinle. Um, that's different from here. I can go up the road about 15 miles and I hit a grocery store. I've got gas that is 10 or 15 miles away. Totally different environment, totally different ecological uh, interactions taking place between me and my environment. But then again, it didn't bother me as much as you might think it would, because I've lived in Japan, I've lived in Germany, Montana. I've lived on the reservation in Montana. Um, I've lived in Washington D.C. I've lived right outside of Los Angeles. I've lived in a lot of fairly alien environments. I lived in a black community right outside of Washington, D.C. I lived in a Hispanic community right outside of Los Angeles. Um, it's you get used to being around people that aren't like you. Ecological perspective has three important components. The person-environment fit. Person-environment fit refers to how well a person's needs, goals, and rights mesh with the social and physical environment. When we lived in Mississippi, that was a real shocker. I'd never lived in the South before. I'm from the North, and people didn't like the way I talked, and sometimes they would give me a hard time because I spoke like I do now. They didn't like that. They said I sounded like a Yankee, and they didn't like that even a little bit. So they gave me a hard time about it. But I didn't change the way that I talked just so that I could get along with those people. Adaptations are the processes people use to sustain or increase the level of fit between themselves and the environment. I had a colleague at Ashford when I was teaching up here in Clinton, Iowa, who was from North Carolina. And he got a job down at Texas A&M University, and he started living down there. And when he went down there, of course, people in North Carolina dress and act and speak in one way. But when he went down to Texas, he changed his southern accent to a Texas accent, and he started wearing cowboy boots. I don't know. Well, you guys wear cowboy boots sometimes. I find them grossly uncomfortable because my foot, as I explained to Dr. Russ, my foot is shaped like a duck's foot. So I have my toe box. My toes are wide. That's the widest part of my foot, is where my toes are, and my toes are fairly straight across. My second toe, my big toe is relatively large, but my second toe is actually longer than my big toe, as weird as that sounds, on both of my feet. So it's fairly straight across. So that's where the biggest part of my toe is. So cowboy boots just don't fit. I mean, the toe box is too small. If I were to try to wear a pair of cowboy boots, I wear a size 12 anyway. They would probably be a foot and a half long because my foot's shaped funny. It's not shaped like people who wear cowboy boots. Anyway, so he adapted by changing the way he talked and changing the clothes that he wore. Life stressors are issues that exceed the resources of an individual to deal with them. And of course, it was relatively stressful. Having to go to Gallup to get groceries was a bit of a stressor. Being away from my family was very stressful, as you can imagine. In the ecological perspective, behaviors are not seen as dysfunctional or maladaptive. Instead, behavior is viewed as adaptations to improve the fit between the individual and the environment. And we always try to do what we can. This is a typical, this person lives in Vietnam. And as you can see, she's carrying her ducks on one balance, and I don't know what she's got in the other. But you can see the way that she's walking. She's walking, this is during monsoon season in Vietnam, and as you can see, she walks with her toes pointed out, which is, a lot of people over there do that. And the reason they do it is because of the water. There's a lot of, not only do they have a monsoon season, but they also plant a lot of rice in Vietnam. And so they're working in rice paddies all the time. The best way to stay stable is not to walk with your toes planted straight. It's to walk with your toes planted out. So they walk what they call slew-footed. And that's the best way to walk through water. It's really kind of odd. As Americans, we march. When we marched, of course, we marched with our toes planted straight. But when we walked through the rice paddies, we kind of had to make our feet as big as possible by pointing them out so that we could stay stable and not fall down. And we learned that from watching the Vietnamese. As weird as that is. Strength perspective. The strengths perspective views all people as having strengths. It focuses on assets clients have developed throughout their lives. A strength is defined as any psychological process that enables a person to think and act in order to benefit himself or herself and society. Strengths are often developed when people struggle with difficulties, traumas, oppression, disappointments, and adversity. Just like this tree, the ground has been washed away, but it's still holding on. It's being oppressed and it's struggling. It's quite a trauma for this poor tree. Everyone has the capacity to develop new resources, to make positive changes, and to use his or her competencies to solve problems. And of course, that's what we try to do. Something has been successful in the past. This has become our strength. So when a new dilemma arises, we try to use the same method that we used before, and that we try to use our strength in order to survive. Strengths perspective invites clients to discover, to think about, and figure out how to use their strengths. This is different from traditional counseling because they tend to identify deficits, weaknesses, and problems. And one of the things that I've noticed is that if you study psychology and you study psychological counseling, a lot of times what you're doing is you're looking for a problem. You're looking for the deficit, you're looking for the weakness, you're looking for the problem that the individual is having. However, if you are a social worker, social workers use the strength perspective in order to deal with their clients. They're always looking for what has been successful for this individual. If we can build them up with using their strengths, then possibly we can create a situation where this person will adapt and they will be able to survive in whatever environment that they are in. And that's one of the differences between psychological counseling and social work counseling. Social work counseling focuses on strengths, and psychological counseling tends to try to identify weaknesses and do away with their problems. When working with individuals, families, groups, or organizations, the practitioner looks for their strengths, identifies their resources, and invites them to focus on possibilities for the future. Now, I just talked about the difference between social work and psychology, but the reality is, whether you are a social worker or a psychologist, you should be identifying people's strengths. You should try to identify how they have been able to adapt in the past. Whether either one. I'm not telling you if you're going to be a psychological counselor that you can't identify strengths. You should always identify strengths, no matter whether you're a social worker or a psychologist. Resilience is the ability to survive and thrive in the face of overwhelming life challenges, like having to run through the mud. Resilience is a dynamic process that is the outcome of positive adaptation in the face of adversity, stress, or risk. And I would suggest to you, this is what I wrote my dissertation on, was resilience, trying to identify resilience in a select community. And resilience is the ability to adapt, is the ability to weather the storm, as it were. Resilience is not a fixed personality trait or an inborn characteristic. No one is either vulnerable or resistant all the time. Some of us have vulnerabilities in select areas. Others have it in another area. Some people won't be able to handle this trauma, but they're able to handle another trauma. You guys probably know that a couple of weeks ago, a windstorm hit our house. It was kind of interesting because both my wife and me are medical people. So when it happened, people are going, "Oh no, this is terrible. My trees were knocked down." And my wife and I just kind of went outside and started cleaning things up. We didn't rue that. We weren't really. We were pretty upset that our trees blew down. But I mean, now they're down. There's nothing we can do about it. It's not like we can pick them up and put them back the way that they were. You need to roll with the punches, and that's what we have done as far as our trees are concerned, as far as our ceiling is concerned, and our roof. You just got to survive. That is one of the definitions of resilience. It's the ability to adapt to whatever the circumstance is. Resilience is learned behaviors and patterns of adaptation, as I just described. Resilience depends on the availability of protective factors. And of course, if you focus on your protective factors rather than focusing on the stressors or the problem that has been created, it's a little bit easier to go to the next patient, as it were. That's what you learn in medicine. You learn that if I've tried my best with this individual, I need to go to the next person, and I have to have 100% of my faculties to do that. I can't be worrying about, doggone it, geez, I wish I could have saved that person, or I wish I had done this with that person. You can't think like that. You've got to cut it off right there and go to the next person. And you have to do that in psychology as well. Maybe you can communicate with one of your clients and you can't communicate with the other one. I would suggest that if you have somebody that isn't really communicating with you, that you work with that client to either find out what it is that how you can help them, or find them another counselor. There's always people that don't like the way that you do things. As an instructor, as a teacher, I have discovered that some people don't like the way that I teach, and other people don't like the way that I teach. Thank goodness more people like the way that I teach than don't like the way that I teach. Otherwise, I probably would be hauling garbage or something. But you've got to go with your strengths. You've got to not worry about what the negative things that have happened. You just got to deal with it. There's no way I can put those trees back up. They are gone, and we're going to have them cut down. And we wish that it hadn't happened, but that doesn't mean, there's nothing we can do about it at this point. Risk factors are any influencing factors that can bring or predict negative outcomes on the functioning and overall development of the individual. They can include biological influences, individual influences, family influences, and community influences. Protective factors are any factors that can exert either direct or indirect influences to buffer the negative effects of risk factors. Protective factors include your strengths, your capabilities, your talents, your coping skills, the resources that you have, and the assets that you have. Resilience represents both a process and the outcome of competent functioning. Resilience as an outcome involves the interplay of risk and protective factors. Resilience as an outcome represents the resultant positive functioning and competence developed when facing adversity. Practitioners using the resilience perspective start with an assessment of the relevant factors and then focus on helping clients build on the resilience that they have developed. The advantages of resilience perspective: practitioners focus on helping clients develop a positive outlook on life and self-confidence, maintain, promote, and enhance protective factors, recall successful events in their lives, identify resources, view a mistake as a window of learning, and focus on the present future. A former student of mine called up this weekend. He's in graduate school. He's working on his PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and he is a TA. He has a fellowship to a select university. Over the last week, he was given his assignment, his TA assignment, and he was embarrassed by the fact that they hadn't given him a new class to teach. They'd given him his old class to teach, and of course that was a negative thing as far as he was concerned, and it is relatively. And we talked for 2 hours. I was trying to convince him that sometimes people don't like what happens, and they say they do negative things, and that's what's happened to you. And of course, this is an individual that has always been successful. He has always worked hard, and because of his hard work, he's always been a golden boy. And all of a sudden, he has a program director that for some reason, doesn't seem to like him and keeps doing negative things as far as he is concerned. And of course, what we needed to do was we needed to do all these things, and we needed to develop a positive outlook on life and his self-confidence. Why in the world would he allow this one person to identify him and tell him who he is? He needs to listen to more positive people than this select individual. He needs to maintain and promote and enhance his protective factors. He needs to recall successful events in his life. He's been very successful with teaching the classes that he has taught up to this point, just because she has decided that not to allow him to teach. He wants to teach statistics, and I really don't like teaching statistics, but I told him, you're lucky you don't have to teach statistics. He needed to identify his resources, of course. He's a foreign national, so if he decides to do something silly like quit, he will be deported back to his home country. View a mistake as a window of learning, and of course I told him that he needed to work on his presentation. I'm sure his presentation is fine. It's just that she doesn't like the way that he teaches, I guess. And focus on the present and the future. He needs to focus on the fact he has finished his master's degree and he's working on his PhD. He needs to focus on that and get away from this negative environment and go find a job where people treat him a little bit better. So he needs to focus on the present and the future. Another perspective is the empowerment perspective. It describes the process by which individuals, groups, and or communities take control of their circumstances to achieve their goals. Empowerment has an internal as well as an external component. The internal component of empowerment is also called psychological empowerment. It has control over your motivations, the thoughts that you have, and the personality that you project in achieving your goals. Internal empowerment involves the belief the individual will make that they will make competent decisions and solve their problems, achieve their goals, and have a significant impact on the environment. The external component of empowerment includes the tangible knowledge, the competencies, the skills, the information, opportunities, and resources that allow the person to take action and actively advocate change. Empowerment, like resilience, is a process as well as an outcome. New competencies learned from experience leads to new feelings of empowerment. Research shows that the more involved an individual, the stronger the feeling of empowerment. The empowerment perspective allows clients to develop a sense of power and competency as they experience using their skills and knowledge in new and challenging ways. The empowerment perspective helps people discover their strengths, identify their goals, and develop a plan to reach their goals, allowing clients to accept responsibility for change and experience a greater sense of empowerment. The dual perspective views an individual as interacting and adapting to two surrounding systems of environments. The nurturing environment is composed of family, friends, and close associates at school or work. The sustaining environment consists of people encountered in the wider community and broader society. I went to see my grandson's soccer game today. That would be my nurturing environment. He is my family, of course. My daughter was there. My wife was there. That was my nurturing environment. And while we were there, in between games, we went to Walmart to buy some food, dog food and whatnot. And that would be our sustaining environment. That's the wider community and broader society. Would be Walmart. While most European Americans experience nurturing and sustaining environments as fitting together, other ethnic and racial groups experience a poor fit between them. And this is kind of interesting. Or it's not very interesting at all, I guess, unless you are a dominant European, from the dominant European culture. Individuals in non-dominant groups constantly evaluate disappointments in life to determine whether they are based on one's qualifications or on racism from the dominant culture. And this is actually one of the things, as I was going through this lecture before I started it, I was thinking, that's kind of what Black Lives Matter is all about. Yeah, sure, everybody's life matters, but the reality is that up to this point, the police at least have acted like Black lives don't matter. They shoot unarmed black people at a much higher rate than they shoot anybody else. Not that they should be killing anyone, especially unarmed people, but it seems that African Americans are targeted by them, and this has to do with a lot of different things. I've been fighting for civil rights since I was in high school, and I've been watching how things progress. Some political administrations have been relatively negative about African Americans, and within the last 40 or 50 years, the party that seems to be so negative about African Americans have been Republicans. Richard Nixon, one of the things that Richard Nixon did, he didn't want to change the draft because the draft was pulling kids off the street and sending them to Vietnam. But most of the kids they were pulling off the street tended to be poor kids. Most of the poor kids that they were pulling off the street and sending to Vietnam that the draft boards were drafting were African American. And for that reason, he didn't mind getting rid of them. There was a problem. The civil rights movement, there were groups of militant African Americans. One of them were the Black Panthers. Another was SNCC. And he certainly didn't mind arresting those select individuals. Another were black Muslims. One of the individuals who became a black Muslim was a boxer by the name of Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay changed it. He became Muslim, and he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. At the time that he refused to go to be drafted, and because of that, he went to jail for 2 years. When he went to jail, he was the world champion, heavyweight champion of the world. He was a heavyweight champion of the world, boxing heavyweight champion of the world. So another Republican president that was relatively negative about African Americans was Ronald Reagan. And you can go on and on and on and on about how this works. And now, of course, we have a relatively negative president who doesn't seem to want to deal with race. That's Donald Trump. And well, anyway, so a lot of people see the Black Lives Matter as necessary because if we know that other groups are important and all lives matter, but it seems that Black lives do not matter when we're dealing with a social situation or a situation on the street. George Floyd. Why he wrote a bad check, and they were arresting him, and even though he wasn't fighting them, they decided that they needed to incapacitate him, and in order to what they did, the one individual put his knee on his neck, and that strangled him to death, and he died. Minority members must develop a dual perspective, equating disappointments with the hostility of the broader society. And of course, this is what we are combating. We are trying to take away the hostility of the broader society. Minority members must constantly shift between home culture and the dominant culture to choose acceptable behavior in each situation. And of course, this is it's not a funny joke. But it is a joke. Started acting white, got a job the first week because he started acting white. There were comedians who were African American comedians, and of course, if they were speaking to a black audience, they would speak with a different voice. There was one comedian back in the 80s and 90s. His name was Robert Townsend. And he grew up in a white community. And because he grew up in a white community, he had a white accent. And he could switch back and forth between talking as if he were white and speaking as if he were black. Another comedian was Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy's from New Jersey, and he grew up in a white community. So Eddie Murphy was able to switch from acting black and acting white. And of course, that they both of these individuals became very famous comedians. The dual perspective allows the practitioner to attempt to understand the structural barriers that those in other groups experience. This perspective makes the practitioner aware of the day-to-day challenges minority clients face. And of course, this is one of the things that you're going to have to do. Now, this is really kind of interesting. I can't remember which movie this is from. This is McLovin. Anyway, so he sometimes he talked like as if he were black. Why am I talking about this? One of the things that you have to determine is is the way that the person is talking, is that the culture that they adhere to, or are they one of those people that are just want to be seen as coming from that culture? And this is one of the things that you have to determine. What culture is does this person adhere to? And of course, if we're talking about millennials, if we're talking about younger generations, their idea of being Navajo may be completely different from from the idea that they have on the fifth floor. And of course, that is what is important, and that is the end of the chapter. And I will turn this thing off. I thought I was turning this on.